Like when we would go to Camp Hero on a school visit, on a field trip, and we would be separate from the other kids. They would take us separate sometimes and bring us to places where they wouldn't go. And they had hatchways. They would ask you, are you ready? One time they asked me, do you want to go down there? And I was scared once when I was really small. I was like, no, I don't want to go down there.
So they singled out a group?
Yeah.
They took you to Camp Hero?
Yeah.
When they said we're going on a trip today, whatever this field trip was, what did they say? Do you remember what they said?
The lighthouse. It was the lighthouse, yeah, but Camp Hero's right there, a quarter mile away. We would walk over there, People died in the name of science. Thousands of kids died in this program out of fear. They were scared to death. I have no reason to lie about any of this, and anybody that doesn't believe it, they're gonna think we're all crazy anyway. It really doesn't matter to me, and I don't really care.
The following motion picture is an honest documentation of a long investigation regarding the bizarre occurrences at the Camp Hero Air Force Base. This is a tale of several men who claim that they were unwilling participants and survivors of an extraordinary evil, which allegedly happened in Montauk, New York, between January of 1971 and August 12, 1983. The interviews and the men who appear in them are real. They are not actors. As there are no artifacts, photographs, and no available evidence of their claims, the stories are further illustrated here for you as cinema. The purpose of this picture is neither to prove or disprove the Montauk legends, but to simply and carefully raise questions. The choice that remains is yours.
We first met with Camp Hero researcher and Montauk local, Mr. Paul Fagan. He spent several years observing and documenting every accessible area of the base, and he knew ways for us to examine locations that were otherwise difficult to reach. One of the more interesting things on the exterior surface was a good number of entrances to the underground. Paul claimed that most of them once led to a large and elaborate tunnel system. We couldn't confirm this information as all of them were either flooded with water or deliberately sealed with cement. The holy grail of this expedition was the Sage radar tower. Paul knew a way for us to get inside, and as I expected, most of the interior was falling apart. Each level was accessible by staircase. However, the stairs didn't lead to a lower level or basement, and there was clearly an elevator shaft that went down. There were remnants of obsolete Air Force technology on every level. The place was a historical catacomb, one part military ghost, and combination haven for urban explorers and bored teenagers.
After searching for the better part of an hour, we heard voices coming from a lower level.
You heard that, right?
The tower, by law, was off limits, so to avoid an encounter with the authorities, we left in a hurry.
St. Joseph, Michigan is the home of Stuart Swerdlow and his family, a former Montauk boy. Stuart claims to have been abducted and abused by the proprietors of the Montauk experiments when he was a child.
I learned very quickly that most people aren't interested in what I experienced, nor would they believe me. And so there were times I would tell other children, because children accept a lot of things, but they thought it was a story that I made up. And so I just learned to be quiet. I didn't tell anybody for the longest time. I must have been well into my adulthood before I even discussed it with anybody. Even with people I was married to, I never discussed in detail because I didn't want to be ridiculed anymore. In 1970, and it was the summer 1970 that one afternoon on a weekend my father said, well, let's go out to Montauk Point. And that was the first time I remember hearing that name, Montauk Point. And we drove out there, and I remember passing the base, and in those days there was an old fighter jet that they had placed in the front of the gates. And I remember my father said, oh, that's the Montauk Air Force Base. And as we passed it, I got this thing in my head, and I said, I know it's in there. I know it's underneath there. Now, I don't know why I thought that, and even at the time I thought that's a strange thing to be thinking right now. But I did think that. I knew something was going on there. I never pressed anybody to believe me or understand me. I didn't know that I could. I grew up in a family of a culture where you just didn't do those things.
Can you tell me a moment that made you happy? Can you recall like a really good time?
I was never happy in my life. There was not one day that I could say, wow, that was a really good day. I was really happy. Not one. I remember sometimes such waves of deep depression came over me. I just didn't want to be here anymore. My life was horrible. You know, there was no peace day or night. I don't know which one I feared more, the day or the night. I was always afraid of the dark. I was afraid to go outside even in the daylight. I could not sleep alone. I'd wake up screaming. I'd have to have someone come in and stay with me. I would see what I now know to be alien beings in my room, or I'd be taken to places which I now know to be underground, into a tunnel system. It was abject fear and horror. And I remember on one occasion, I actually found a rope or a belt or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. I thought, you know, I don't want to live in this life anymore because it was just too difficult. And I put it around my neck and I pulled it as tight as I can, thinking I'd suffocate. But, you know, when you do such a thing, there's a reflex that stops you from completing it. And so I couldn't, I said, how do people commit suicide? I hear people hang themselves and do these things. And I couldn't understand how they did it. And so I tried it a couple of times, obviously without success. So I thought, well, I must have a reason for being here, but I don't want to be here because my life is very different than those people I know in high school. Shows like Star Trek or Lost in Space or Twilight Zone, when I say, okay, there's a story about things I believe in or things I've experienced, so someone else is thinking about it too. So perhaps when I watched those shows or read a book about those things, that was the only comfort I had. If you could consider it comfort, I just felt then I wasn't completely alone.
As a child, did you question your own sanity? Did you ever say, hey, maybe I'm seeing these things, maybe there's something wrong with me? Did you ever feel that way at all?
When I was a child, again, I never realized that there was a normal or not normal. There was just existence, and people were just the way they were. If you were crazy, you wound up in an institution back then. There was no psychologist, there was no psychiatrist per se. You know, if you were nuts, you went in a hospital and stayed there. But in my situation, having bad dreams, weird experiences, knowing that something wasn't right, that was just I was an odd child. That's the category that I would be put on. He's just very odd. A typical abduction experience that I had as a child, and they did change as I got older. But as a small child, it would always begin with these type of shadows that would appear on the wall of my room. In those days, we had metallic blinds on the windows. They would start to vibrate, or the windows would start to tap or move. And I would get the sensation that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me, something was going to come in my room. I just knew it. I can't explain. It was a knowing. I just knew it was going to happen. Then I'd be paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was feel them levitating me, and sometimes I'd actually feel my body lifting off the bed, and I would literally float out through the window. And then the next thing I knew, I was surrounded by beings. Sometimes they were small, sometimes they were tall, but they were not human. They had what I now know to be alien features. And then I'd be placed on a table, strapped down, or felt like clamped down. I couldn't move my arms or my legs. I knew I was naked. And then I would feel things on my body, probes, needles, pressure. Sometimes it would feel like there was a hand inside of my body touching my organs. Bright lights above me so that I couldn't see who was standing or what was standing around me. And I remember basically fear. I was constantly afraid. The so-called little gray aliens were used in the beginning to abduct people and bring them. But I can tell you that the little grays are a manufactured race. They're not a natural species. They are nothing more than human fetuses grown to larger position and mind-controlled. There was generally paralysis, fear, and pain. I'd say those were the three general constants in the experiences. Each experience was different. Sometimes I would be put back in my room and several hours had passed. And sometimes it felt like a few minutes. And as I got older and I became involved in what I now know to not be alien but human experimentations, then it was days and weeks and months. But they were able to bend time so that they would put you back almost to the time they took you. But mentally I knew I had experienced a very long time away. And so when I would become aware of the date and time, it didn't make sense to me because I knew I had just had an experience that was way longer than what the clock said I had experienced. When these events would happen at night, yes, I would very often try to fight back, but the issue was, once I became aware of what was happening, my body was paralyzed. I couldn't move except for my head and my eyes. And sometimes I would try to scream and nothing would come out of my mouth.
If you could have stopped it, would you have? Would you have, if there was a switch you could shut off, would you have stopped this thing from happening at night?
My biggest desire was to stop these events from happening every night, or at least several times per week. And so, yeah, nighttime and sleep time were my enemies. I feared them.
When darkness falls over Montauk, the town is silent. The few that venture out into the night are isolated to local pubs. However, in the 1970s, when the town was sleeping, evil is said to have been wide awake beneath the surface of Camp Hero. One of the most sinister aspects of the Montauk Project is known as the Montauk Boys Program, a brutal experiment designed to dominate the minds of its victims.
We don't know for sure who actually ran it, because it was not listed on any of the books of the military or government.
The German scientists who had been taken around the bypassed through the Nuremberg. They never went to Nuremberg in the Nuremberg trials. They were bypassed into the U.S. straight to the Brookhaven National Laboratories and worked there for 20 years until they were kicked out by Congress. And then they looked for a new home and they found it at Montauk.
And at that point, that's when it became literally a black secret project, because the idea of mind control at that time was not popular with Congress. So it had to be moved to where it could be totally a secrecy. Montauk Air Force Base was selected because it was at that time a sleepy little fishing village, and the project could be hidden out there.
They wanted a large number of programmed boys to be used for mind control operations.
The Montauk Boys program, basically, what they were doing, they would pick up boys, young men, off the street and take them to this facility.
And it started by picking them up off the streets around Long Island, then New York. Lost kids, left home, living off the streets, do anything for a living to make a few bucks.
Runaway teens, prostitutes, foster children, children of drug addicts, whomever was considered expendable, and no one would miss them. But they would also have scouting missions in cities and other locations. They knew the type of genetics they were looking for, and if they saw someone that matched those genetics and that person was easily grabbable, they would take that person. And there was always water dripping down this cement wall, concrete block wall, rock, depending on what room I was in.
Were the words Montauk spoken down in that base?
No. I didn't know where it was. Sometimes they would throw you in a cement room and they would hit you with a wooden pole, or they would take some kind of metal rod and hit you with it. There were a number of different people that would administer the tortures, experiments, programming, etc. They were not always the same person, so that I would not develop any kind of relationship with them, and they would not feel a relationship with me. I wouldn't call them handlers particularly. I think some of them were just kind of automatons. They were sometimes soldiers. They looked like soldiers. Sometimes they looked like ordinary people off the street. I never knew what to expect, and they were always different. They're always male, never a female that would do these kinds of things.
The beatings were the most horrible, and the fact that they were doing it without the approval of the kids. You know, it was literally kidnapping.
One thing they loved to do was drown you, hold you underwater to the point where you were about to give up.
They wanted to split the mind. They wanted to shatter the mind. Then they would program each individual piece for something else.
But what was the intention on the beatings and the drownings? That must have been...
That was to shatter the mind even further.
So they can manipulate it.
Yes, they can manipulate it.
Part of the breaking the psyche of the person to install programming, to fracture the mind pattern, is to make you uncomfortable. Because when you're, first you're cold, then you're hot, then you're cold, and the mind doesn't know what to expect, and after a while it fractures.
they'd leave a few pieces to be their normal awake mind, and then they would program the buried pieces. And then it was my responsibility to put them all back together again. So the programming is safe behind the trauma block. Now, if you're going to remove the programming, you got to remove that trauma block. And the idea there was, you going to go in your own horror world? No, of course not.
Okay, when you take a personality and you fragment it into pieces, they take one of the pieces and then they develop it into a sub-personality or a related personality, which is a little different than the core personality. And then they provide a code that triggers that personality to come forward and take control of the body. They were programmers, not handlers or controllers, but programmers who would only come into the room after I had been sedated, drugged, beaten. I was pretty much immobile, just laying there on the table fastened down, and then the programmers would come in. Then they would put the lights over the table, then they would fasten things to different parts of my body, particularly my head area. There were so many different types of rituals that involved astral entities, but one of them was to create the child as a vessel, so that the entity could enter the body of the child and animate it, and then those participating in the ritual would achieve the energy of that entity that was occupying the body. There would be a chemical type of smell. They would put things in my arms, in my legs, in my genitals, in my head, and then I would hear input voices over and over and over again, and then there'd be like this swirl. I would see this swirling vortex over my visual perception. You just didn't even care anymore because you couldn't even feel the pain anymore. I think that was a form of dissociation, and that's what they wanted. They wanted you to dissociate, fracture the mind. That's how the programming begins.
I did see a couple of their sessions. It was disgusting, made me sick.
Can you describe a little bit of that?
I would just as soon die.
The amazing things that they could think of to create fear, anxiety, and fracturing. I don't know how human beings could even think up such things, but they did. And so, if you survived, maybe you weren't so lucky if you survived. Definitely, I did see people die. I saw animals being murdered. I saw people being murdered. I saw rapes of all kinds. And I suppose the idea was to desensitize from those things so that if you were programmed to do any of that, it wouldn't make you feel it one way or another. It would be completely neutral to you because you'd been so downloaded with this for so many times. It was no more different than washing your hands.
What was their purpose behind using children? What was the idea behind it for the people that have no idea?
Using children was extremely important because they were innocent and they had extreme fear. The pineal gland excretes a chemical called adrenochrome, and this is a body enhancer, a mind enhancer, a mood enhancer that the Illuminati and the elite use, which is extremely powerful if extracted when a person is at the height of fear. Depending on the kind of programming that they were going to use a particular person for, depending on that person's mind pattern and genetics, they would use drugs like LSD because they were trying to find the combination that would create an altered state that allowed easy downloading of the programming. Some of it was thanks to the Nazis. Some of it was thanks to some alien groups that had been doing this for millions of years. So when they take a child who is more afraid than an adult in most situations, and they bring them to a state of extreme fear, and at that moment they sacrifice them, then they immediately extract the adrenochrome from the pineal gland, and that was more valuable to them than gold.
What they would do, among many other things, you'd have them in their robes and hoods all around here, and you probably have, or you would have the sacrifice on the slab here.
This is the altar.
This is their altar, yeah. And what they're doing, it's horrible, but let's get the truth out. What they're doing is manipulating the sacrifice. The sacrifice knows the sacrifice is coming, and who's going to help them? Look,
right.
At midnight or something. No one. And what they then do is they sacrifice the victim, and they drink the blood immediately, which has this chemical substance in it, and they go crazy. I mean, you know, I've talked to people who've been at these rituals, and how once the sacrifice happens and the blood runs, these people go crazy with blood. There was a man called Stanley Kubrick, the great filmmaker.
I think I've heard of him.
Stanley Kubrick was an insider, and he wanted to expose it. And his last movie was called Eyes Wide Shut.
I've seen it.
Now, Eyes Wide Shut, he died very, very soon after it was presented to executives at the film company, and was given no fanfare whatsoever when it came out.
Didn't
It
they
just
re-edit the
disappeared.
hell out of it as well?
Yes, they did. They took 25 minutes out of it, which he refused to do. Now, he filmed a ritual with Tom Cruise in it, in which I only know more recently was a Rothschild mansion. And what he filmed is a mild version of what goes on, because he knew. And you had the colors. You have most people in the ritual in Eyes Wide Shut were in black. The main guy was in red. Here we go again.
Yeah.
You had the orgies going on, and you had the people being killed, the lady being killed. But that was such a mild version. I don't know what was in the 25 minutes they took out, mind, because the real version is that there's blood every bloody way. We see a hierarchy in the public arena of president, secretaries of state, of prime ministers, secretaries of state, down.
Yeah.
That's the public hierarchy. The real hierarchy in the shadows is the occult hierarchy. And if you're higher in the occult hierarchy, the satanic hierarchy, which is incredibly hierarchical, it's all hierarchical, then you have more power over someone higher than you in the public hierarchy.
That's when you would be extracted immediately, and the programmer who would be doing this to you would tell you, I saved your life, I am your new God, and you must behave and listen to me always. We were told that what was going on there was for the benefit of humanity, that humanity was unable to take care of itself, basically because people were violent, evil, and stupid, to cut it to the bottom line. And so what they were doing was helping to control society so that civilization could continue without being destroyed. They said the pain and the suffering that you experience will actually save mankind. And that's what we were imprinted with.
Eventually I went to him and I says, look, what you're doing is stupid. You get the kids, you want to get the kids to cooperate voluntarily. Here's what I suggest you do. And I had to go up through, I don't know how many levels upstairs above John Pruitt to the second in command of the entire operation, who was a civilian, but he had the authority. I went to him and I says, look, this is what I propose you do to get the cooperation of the Montauk boys. Instead of forcing them into this, give them a carrot. Give them something in exchange for their services and allowing you to program them.
And of course it evolved into a more humane way of doing it. And they were set out, put back in the public as like Manchurian candidate soldiers. They could be activated at any time. And we figure there's at least 100,000 of them done around the country.
Nobody was sure of exactly what the Montauk boys trained for. Many of them were used as spies. It didn't matter Harry, except he was a male. And that was a major part of the program. There's another major part of the program which was swept under the rug, was a lot of the kids were psychics. And they descended on this and trained them as psychics to engage in psychic warfare. And this is where some of the problems have come from in the military since.
Most of them were being programmed as some sort of a PSY soldier. You can program sections of the mind to heighten the psi ability that they have. Everyone has psi abilities.
There are rogue groups within the government, naval intelligence being one but not the only one, and I want to make it very clear, I am not blaming naval intelligence as a whole. I'm not condemning naval intelligence as a whole. There's some very good people in there. But they have a rogue group, which are these Montauk kid types who are going to the dark side and are going into the black arts. If you don't think that's real, you better do your homework. It is very real. Our masters, and who knows how much of this comes from alien knowledge and alien help, I don't know, but I suspect some of it does. But they can manipulate a person's mind, their psyche, their nervous system, cause a total collapse of the nervous system on command. This is part of the, shall we say, the broadened area, the larger area of Montauk and what it led to.
My own estimation, there were thousands of people that were lost in these experimentations. Sometimes they would send them back in time or future into time, and they never came back. The one Stargate that I used looked like a mirror. And I remember being flat on my back on, I guess it was some kind of table or slab, and then the next thing I knew, I almost like became part of it. I just was in it.
As you may know from other research, the human body has its own biorhythms. So does the planet Earth. The planet Earth has a whole series of biorhythms, but it has four principal ones. Those patterns of four overlapping biorhythms peak out and create a very strange electronic synchronization pattern, which the aliens knew all about, but we knew nothing about at that time. Long-distance wormhole operations. They helped us to understand that. It says, you know about time travel, but you don't know how to build a system which will combine time travel and space travel. It says, we can do that for you. Well, the government was elated. They said, happily, yes, sure, fine.
Every point in time and space has a unique set of coordinates vibration. And so when you know the target zone of where you want to go, and there is that reference of vibrational energy, and then you take what you want to send and you match it identically to the rate of vibration of the target, there's instant connection. So we would get the coordinates, we would get the frequency rate of vibration of that particular zone of space, and then by thinking about it, the psychic on the chair would tap in mentally to that vibration, and he would create the energy connection between his point A and point B, the target zone. And that's how civilizations are able to go through billions of light years in space and time instantly.
After years of brutal experimentation, Stuart Swerdlow claims to have been recruited for several missions, to travel back in time, where he extracted DNA samples for the purpose of cloning historical as well as biblical figures. With technology given by extraterrestrials, time as well as interstellar and interdimensional travel was possible. Alfred Bielek claimed to have traveled to the planet Mars on several occasions, where he witnessed ancient structures and artifacts from a previous civilization.
Basically, the government would take alien technology, they would be taught how to use it, and then they would re-engineer it to other things. And the aliens knew about these things, and I think sometimes they purposely kind of gave us a rope to hang ourselves, and sometimes they were curious to see what we would develop with it.
They, convince the governments to do what they want by saying, we'll give you great technologies, which they have.
Now, I have to say that when this technology was given, many coordinates were provided with it. But if we wanted to go someplace that the alien civilization didn't tell us about, we had to find those coordinates. And so it was experimental. We knew basically what the frequency was in that zone of space, but we didn't know the specifics. for whatever reason, the honing device that would connect them didn't work. Or sometimes it broke in the transmission. Sometimes we didn't know what happened. And so they were lost.
And how did you feel? I mean, you witnessed some of these children, other children being lost in these experiments. How did you feel when you saw them go away and not come back? Were you afraid that this was going to happen to you?
I never developed emotional connection to anybody there. So I saw so many people come and go. It was like, you see the grass in the summertime and then it's covered up in snow in the winter and then there's new grass. It's like, didn't make a difference. They were there and they weren't there. And so I know that sounds harsh, but that's the way it was, and you have to have an experience to understand that.
What would you say to the people who say, well, all these children were kidnapped and murdered and you were a part of it? What would you tell them if they said, well, they're trying to say, well, you were part of this, you approved of this? What would you tell them?
did approve of it, but there was nothing I could do about it.
How did they dispose of the bodies? Would there be a crematorium in Montauk? How were the children disposed of? The ones that were killed, how would they dispose of the bodies?
Truthfully, I have no idea. I never witnessed how they disposed of the bodies. I was told several different things. One, that they were burned. One, that they were put in a room and lime was thrown over them to decompose them. I was also told they were dumped in the ocean or weighted down. All kinds of different stories. So truthfully, I don't know how they disposed of the bodies, but they did dispose of them. I was told that over the 13 years of the project, there were as many as 300,000 that were used in the experimentation. Of that amount, I was told less than 1% survived, and of that less than 1%, very few were able to function in society.
How many do you think in that period of time, let's say between, 1971, roughly?
72,
72 to
maybe
83.
80.
So how many do you think, approximately?
Probably at Montauk itself, at least 10,000.
Between a minimum figure of 10,000 and a possible maximum figure of 100,000. Because Long Island was not the only point where they were brainwashing these kids and setting up the Montauk Boys programs. Eventually they wound up in every major city in the U.S.
That's actually a small number. Do you know that in this day and age that there are over 5 million people a year that vanish off the face of the earth without a trace? So 300,000 over the course of 13 years is quite insignificant.
Let's put it this way. If you're sitting there with 20 guns pointed at you, what are you going to do? Whatever the hell they want! First of all, I have the self-preservation instinct, like every one of us has. And getting shot hurts. I can tell you that from personal experience. And I don't want to be hurt. If you're going to kill me, okay, kill me, you son of a bitch. I bore fear being hurt and laying in a hospital for years in pain.
So, in other words, you were forced to do this. This was against your will.
Initially, it wasn't. But I really had no way out of it.
The final moments of the Camp Hero experiments, according to its reluctant members, were rooted in the defiance of a mysterious program director, Mr. Jack Pruitt.
I had very little to do with Jack Pruitt. I guess the closest was at the end when he pulled a gun on me and told me to go cut apart the transmitter to shut it down. He was a lieutenant, the first lieutenant that was listed on all the paperwork as being in charge of the Montauk Air Force Station.
Preston Nichols and several surviving members claim to have met here, at the Memory Motel, to devise a plan that would inadvertently end the project for good.
So the original focus was to generate a field that would control the way the general population would think and act. That's what they wanted. They wanted mind control into the mass population. So we all decided the project was going in a very bad direction and we wanted to crash it.
That's when you just realized this thing has got to be shut down and destroyed no matter how we do it. It's got to be stopped, or everything's out of control. Because we realized the consequences of this expanding to another level.
The Montauk chair, which many people have read about and heard about, was Sirius A technology. It was able to download thoughts from anyone sitting in that chair, store it into a computer, amplify it, and broadcast it to a specific person, place, or thing.
At the output of the computer, you had the digital representation of that concept that the chairperson was thinking about. If he was thinking about this remote control, as complete as this is in his mind, the digital output of the main computer system could, in the virtual world, model this exactly. If he had the whole thing, all the information was there to literally create this thing.
There was a psychic by the name of Duncan Cameron who was one of the ones used, and many of us boys who were in our early teens at the time were used energetically to boost him while he was in the chair.
The Montauk project was basically a mind amplifier or a wish machine. And I remembered the movie Forbidden Planet with the monsters from the inn. So what I wanted to have done, and we all agreed, was for Duncan to materialize something like that. Even though it wasn't fully physical, it would scare the bejesus out of the out of the top people, and they'd shut it down. But we actually got something physical and real.
So what was true about the Philadelphia experiment? Well, for starters, the movie was based on something real, but took extreme liberties in its storytelling. It's a Hollywood adaptation of some of the strange tales concerning whatever happened in those shipyards. As the story goes, in 1943, the U.S. Navy allegedly made a warship, a Cannon-class destroyer escort named the USS Eldridge, vanish. Reports indicate a strange greenish-blue glow was cast around the ship's hull once certain top-secret equipment was powered on. And it warped from the Philadelphia naval shipyards to Virginia and back. So instead of just cloaking, it actually teleported. So dangerous was the journey through space and time that most of the ship's crew fell victim to madness, or were grotesquely fused to the ship itself. It was truly an awful sight to behold if these reports, and indeed there are several, are true. Now, we have a few different accounts of the tale from different perspectives, but I am focusing on the testimony of Al Bielik, who supposedly led a double life, one as a loving family man and the other as a shadowy military scientist, working on Black Ops projects like Montauk Project, a secret government operation which dealt with experimentation in time travel and psychic warfare, and, of course, the now infamous Philadelphia experiment, among other operations. If Montauk Project sounds familiar, it's because Stranger Things took some serious inspiration from the events supposedly transpiring at the military complex, which actually did exist in Montauk, New York. But more on that another time. Today we're talking about Philly, baby! Woo! Remember that film from the beginning? The one which sparked my initial interest in the subject? It also inspired Al Bielik to go public with his alleged first-hand knowledge of the Philadelphia experiment. Shortly after seeing the film, a flood of memories rushed into Bielik's mind. He questioned them, but they were so real. Had his memories been replaced? What was real? In the end, Bielik pieced together the fragments and put it all back together. The puzzle of his life was reassembled. And so it was, in 1989, he came forward publicly.
Hello, My name is Alfred Bielik, more commonly known as Al Bielik. Original family name is Edward Cameron.
When Al Bielik woke up, he remembered a few things. Among them, he wasn't actually named Al Bielik. He was, in fact, another man altogether by the name of Edward Cameron, born in 1916, a full decade before he was quote-unquote officially born. And he had different parents, a different life, and a brother, Duncan Cameron, who he had by now been long estranged from. Both had enlisted in the military for service during the Second World War and quickly rose in rank and stature, eventually working under figures like Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and Dr. John von Neumann, specifically on a secret project to cloak warships and essentially render them invisible, something extremely important and strategically valuable during World War II. German U-boats had a reputation of ruthless precision when it came to sinking Allied ships, and the Allies needed an advantage to help win the war, and this technology would give them such an advantage. So it was that on a warm August night in 1943, after months of preparation, and a successful previous test on a smaller vessel, a new test was set to render an entire warship invisible, and Bielik and his brother were chosen to operate the controls from below deck on the USS Eldridge for this, the Philadelphia experiment. Everything was fine at first, but the experiment quickly grew out of control. Flashes of light began to erupt from the equipment, and the brothers were unable to shut down the power. The radio picked up nothing but static as they cried out for help. And upon escaping the control room, which by this point was totally unstable, and reaching the upper deck of the ship, the brothers saw that the ship was surrounded by a strange fog. I want to tell you more, but let's have Al Bielik himself tell you what happened next.
We went for the railing. We both had the same idea at the same time. Let's jump overboard and swim ashore. There's nothing we can do. Everything appeared normal to the ship, up to the railing and slightly beyond. But a short distance beyond the railing, there was nothing but a solid gray fog. Well, we didn't think anything about that. We said, let's jump overboard, and we did. I mean, we didn't say this verbally. This is, shall we say, simultaneous mental thinking. We jumped overboard, and we never hit the water. We were good swimmers. We weren't worried about the height. Never hit the water. We started to fall. The sensation was like falling down an elevator shaft with no bottom. And down we went, and down we went. And suddenly, we were, shall we say, perhaps panic-stricken. We didn't have enough time to worry about being panic-stricken, but we were totally dismayed. We had not the slightest idea what was going on. We were more or less side by side. And this went on until what we estimate was about 2 minutes later. We arrived in a very strange location. At night, standing upright, next to a chain link fence. And it was dark, and we didn't know where we were. But we knew it was a military base in all likelihood because the chain link fence was of a military design. At that point, very suddenly, a very bright spotlight beamed down on us, illuminated us very brightly. We wondered what that was. Well, we know what searchlights were, but it was on a helicopter, and helicopters were unknown to us because in 1943 there were very few. They were experimental. But as it turned out, this was a production-type helicopter, as we learned later. But MPs came out of someplace and grabbed us and took us to a building. In the building, on an elevator, down the elevator shaft, the door opens. We see a lot of military personnel and a very elderly civilian in a gray business suit, white hair, what was left of it on the sides of his head, walking towards us. He looks at us and says, "Gentlemen, I've been expecting you. I'm Dr. John von Neumann." So we look at him, and he says, "You're who?" And I says, "I'm Dr. John von Neumann." Couldn't be. We left him approximately an hour or so ago, and he's a much younger man. Couldn't be you. And he looked at us rather sternly and says, "Gentlemen, this is not 1943. This is 1983. I am the same Dr. von Neumann you knew in 1943, except I'm 40 years older. Welcome to the Montauk Air Force Station," or words to that effect.
Somehow, the brothers had entered a hole in space and time and ended up encountering their old boss, 40 years older, in 1983. Von Neumann gave Bielik and his brother a tour of the Montauk facility, and Bielik had his mind absolutely blown by a commercial for American Airlines advertising Hawaiian vacations. I mean, I understand. If I could visit Hawaii for what it cost in 1983, I'd be blown away too. After some rest, von Neumann informed the brothers of the grave reality of the situation. A hyperspace bubble had been created by the Eldridge, which was still lost in this hole in space-time, and it was growing bigger by the minute thanks to the unstable experimental equipment aboard the Eldridge, and the inability to power it down. If left unchecked, this could, in theory, envelop the entire Earth with disastrous consequences. Someone had to be sent back to the decks of the ship to destroy the equipment, and the brothers were the men chosen for the mission. Von Neumann informed the brothers that with the time technology available to them at Montauk, they'd be able to send them back to the precise moment necessary, and then they had to dismantle the equipment by any means at their disposal. They agreed, and fitted with radiation suits to protect them, they were hurled through time again, landing on board the decks of the Eldridge, into a sight straight out of a horror film like Event Horizon. Men were literally fused to the decks of the ship, some alive, some dead. Those alive screamed out in utter agony. The sailors not fused to the ship had mostly gone insane and were running about the decks of the ship in fits of absolute psychosis. Bielik and his brother Duncan grabbed some fire axes in the control room and set to work smashing any and all equipment related to the project. And as the ship began to phase back out of hyperspace, field energy from the coils starting to wane, back on deck, Duncan, finally taking in the sight that the Eldridge was in and the absolute horror of the situation, took a look back at his brother, a hand on the ship's railing as if to say, "You coming?" and then leapt back over the edge of the ship, into the fog, traveling through time to parts unknown. Bielik stayed behind as the ship finally phased back into 1943, Navy personnel finally boarding the ship, surveying the carnage. For Bielik, many hours, or perhaps even days had passed. But for those initially watching the ship vanish in 1943, it had only been mere moments. Bielik went on to work on many other secret government operations at Montauk.
And so Pruitt comes into play. And what did he do to get you to go?
Pulled a gun on me. At that time, I didn't know to stick my finger in the end of, okay, you son of a bitch, pull the trigger.
And I said, "You want me to go in there?" I said, "Yes." "You are going in there?" I said, "I don't think so." And Pruitt pulls out a .45 and aims it at Preston's head and says, "You're going in there." I said, "Yeah, I guess I am."
Were you scared about, in regard to...
You weren't going to get me in that building. Not voluntarily. We first cut all the power going in, and the damn thing didn't stop. It just kept going on and on. It was locked into some sort of a loop through quantum realities, and the energies were just building and building and building, and my fear was getting higher and higher and higher. I wanted the worst way to get out of there. I didn't know if I was going to go up in a bright flash. There was all sorts of discharges taking place. I didn't know what I was going to run into. Because at that point, the whole system is run totally out of control. And it was like bedlam on that place. And then the radar tower was awful.
This was the end. So that's when they broke the connections, the computer was shut down, and its ability to create on its own ended. It became a very serious problem because they could not turn the whole station on again as it had been.
In August 12, 1983, that's when it crashed, and it just came... I felt like I was unplugged from a wall, like I had been an electric appliance that was plugged in, and all of a sudden someone unplugged me. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt everything just... I went cold, I went numb, I just felt like electrical energy just left me, and I'll never forget that. The ultimate goal of the Illuminati is complete domination and manipulation of all of existence. We live in a world of now over 7 billion people. The Illuminati, or those who could claim connection to Illuminati, are really just a few 100,000. So the odds are stacked against them. If everyone in the world rebelled against the Illuminati, they could be overrun in moments. What will happen to the human race? That's a very interesting question. If we retain, as a species, victimization mentality, and we allow tyrants and oppressors to take advantage and control us, then they will be successful. But I don't think a civilization can remain ignorant forever.
hey, how do I know any of these could be possible? I think that we ought to focus on the things that we can prove, the things that we do have documents for, and get a couple of small victories first, and get the rest of the global society on board and saying, hey, wait a second, all of our governments are hiding terrible atrocities from us, and if we're able to find these few small things and get a victory with them, I have a feeling that once you dig deeper and you're able to remove the villains from power, you're gonna find a lot more answers.
People have a tremendous appetite for conspiracy. On the one hand, it's fun to believe that there is this adventure happening behind the scenes. And on the other hand, some people are terrified by it because they feel disempowered. They feel that they are pawns in someone else's game, and that there is a deeper, darker reality that overshadows their life and in many cases influences their life.
It's a puzzle. All these things like Camp Hero, they are giant puzzles because there were so many people involved, and the stories became more and more outlandish, that became more convoluted. So you have to find as many credible pieces of something and see if those pieces attach to each other. When I interviewed one of our original astronauts, Gordon Cooper, during the interview, Cooper said to me, well, you know, there are experiments going on involving time travel. And I remember going, what? He says they think that they could work it out eventually where a human passenger could go ahead in time into the future, but they don't know if they can figure out how to bring him back. So I said to Gordon, well, who would be dumb enough to agree to do that, to take a one-way trip of that kind? And he, very deadpan face, looked at me and said, you're looking at him.
I know for a fact that the government was keenly interested in what later became known as remote viewing. We had visitation to our research lab numerous times by the CIA, by the NSA, by DARPA, by the Office of Naval Intelligence. It was a single blind condition. They were brought in. We were given targets to locate through this remote viewing process, and we got such specific information. We were describing details of the Trident sub being developed and their missiles and the guidance technology that the audio tapes we produced while they were there were so, I guess you'd say, informative and invasive that they demanded that we surrender the tapes to them, which we did. The funding for remote viewing was through the federal government. They did tremendous amount of work clinically demonstrating and proving and validating, yes, it is possible to see things at a distance, to observe things ahead of time and backwards in time, and to perhaps even act upon them. The intelligence community has pressured and manipulated the media, the print media and television and movies, to lie to us about what's really going on. Why? Because it's the most classified subject in the history of humanity. We're dealing with technology that could change the course of human evolution, that would upset the notion of who we are, where we came from, and where we're going to.
When you weeded out all the good stuff from the bad stuff, you are left with a small percentage of UFO-related events, not just in the United States, but all over the world, that is a signal that there is something going on that points to the idea that we're not alone in the universe, and we should be told.
It's not a far-fetched concept to imagine that people were kidnapped and brought to Montauk. If we look at the world, such things are happening all the time. It is almost a constant of humanity or human experience that the weaker are being exploited by the stronger. And so it's not too difficult for me to imagine that individuals or people or groups are willing to take advantage of the weak and defenseless. And which one of us is more defenseless than a young child?
Almost at the moment that I was ready to write my final hypothesis, I was contacted by a man who claimed that he too was a victim of the Camp Hero mind control. Mr. James Bruce, as he requested to be called, is a family man and former member of the U.S. military. He explained to me that he was recruited into an ongoing version of the Montauk Project that began when he was in kindergarten and lasted to this very day.
They would put us into class in kindergarten and we would put puzzles together, and whoever took the longest or whoever couldn't, some kids couldn't even put puzzles together. When they found that you did do good at putting the puzzles together, they would walk up to you and they would go, "Oh, we got a winner. Here's a winner right here." They were looking for kids with psychic abilities. They were looking for kids that would keep their mouths shut. They were looking for kids that would be assassins, good with their hands, good soldiers. It's going to sound crazy. All this shit's going to sound really crazy. It's going to sound felonious, but this is all the truth, and this is how it went down. So if I changed it in any way, it wouldn't be the truth.
Tell me exactly how you know.
So this is what happened. So now
I interviewed James for 3 hours, and he told a variety of bizarre stories that he claimed were entirely true. One story in particular, James explained that in his late teens, he was abducted by an imposter, disguised as his father, who later met with Al Bielek for a series of experiments at Camp Hero.
He pulls up, and I think it's my father, which I believed it was. I got in the car with him and everything, and my friend's father goes, "That's not your father." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "That's my father right there." He sounds, "Get in the car! Time for you to go home." And he, just like him, everything like him, And then I looked and I said, "Isn't he?" And I said, "No, man, same car, looked just like, he's my father." So he goes, "I'm telling you, don't go with him, man, that's not your father." I get in the car and I go, and he goes, "Where are we going?" "We're going to Montauk, we're going to take a ride." So I'm still crashed out. I said, "All right, I'm going in the back seat." I'm sleeping in the back seat. I'm like, "All right, whatever, that's a long drive, good, I'll go back to sleep." So anyway, he goes, "Well, we got to go meet somebody first." And that's when he picked up Al Bielek. And Al Bielek took us to Montauk, and we pulled in. It was in the middle of the night.
You drove up to Camp Hero?
Yeah, right up to Camp Hero.
And was there an entrance to go
in? You walk through a trail. I can show you right where it is to this day. It's even right in the part where you can see. It's a bunker, metal one, with a little doorway, and then when you go in though, it's got another doorway that comes out the side. And then what they did is they took the chair out from underground, and they had brought it up to a top layer, so then they had to hook up all the computers to it again. And that's what he did when we were there. He hooked all the computers up back to it. They had it running, they got it running again. They go, "Well, we want you to get in this chair right here." And I said, No, I'm not getting in that fucking chair. And they're like, "No, well, we want you, come on, you gotta help us out, you gotta help us, you gotta do something. It's important to get in the chair and just lay down. Everything's gonna be all right." And I was like, "No, I'm telling you right now." And they go, "Well, we're gonna make you get in there then." And they grabbed me, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, one guy, Al, grabbed my one arm, and my father grabbed the other arm. Well, anyway, when they grabbed me, I couldn't even move either arm. My father took his hand with like a razor and went like this around his neck and ripped like this and pulled his fucking face off like this. Pulled his whole fucking face off. And then he put it back on. And I was like, what? Now, what that makes me think that was Hollywood. That was their ways of, that whole person wasn't even my father. It was all a Hollywood
Were they giving you drugs at the time?
No drugs. No drugs at all.
So
no drugs at all.
This is something that you just saw right before.
They can't have you on drugs, or you can't go through the chair right, really, or you could die. People are dead from this in mental institutions right now from this. That went crazy and hung themselves. The government killed a lot of people too. Everything that you ever were taught in school, or everything that you believe to be real that's going on in this country right now is a complete lie.
I returned to Camp Hero once again. I encouraged James to locate the hatch that he claimed Alfred Bielek took him to for the experiments. The wooded path that led to this location was a short distance from the main entrance of the base, and it was also a place that in the entire 5 years of my investigation I hadn't yet known of or visited.
Wow. Wait a second.
I do remember exactly where it was.
This is where Al Bielek took you.
Well, yeah, this is the bunker, yeah. Well,
Hold on. There's a lot of thick thorns and stuff over here. So underneath this concrete, you're saying there's a hatch that leads down to a room?
You see over here, there's a whole bunker over here. Come here, look. We're on top of it, actually. Look.
Almost 6 years after I began my investigation, I stared deep into the structure before me, and one singular image came to my mind. It's the one image that I feel my investigation is tantamount to. An endless road bordered by a dark forest on both sides. I'm left with a total enigma. I can't confirm if Mr. James Bruce or any of the subjects of this documentary are telling the truth. A full official confirmation would require solid analytical proof. It would require a corpus delicti, tangible technological evidence, and it would require the evidence that sound minds have unanimously agreed would confirm its existence. What we're left with are unanswered questions, and an investigation that's still open.
Why would anybody just come out of nowhere and just start making this shit up? That's what I would want to say. You're going to see, one day you're going to see, I don't know if it's going to be in our lifetime, but people will see, and they're going to dig everything up, and they're going to find bones, they're going to find bodies.
This is at Montauk.
At Montauk, you're going to find bones. It's going to look like the catacombs in France. To me, I always thought they were going to come and kill me because I knew too much and all this other shit, and it took me a lot to even go this far right now.
So what would you, I mean, what
would you know if I'm doing the right thing now even, so. I wish somebody would have spoken to me and let me know more if I'm doing the wrong thing right now. If this is wrong in their eyes, I wish they would have come to me and spoke to me. And that's what tends to make me think even more so that maybe they want me to do this interview. Or maybe they want this to come out.
I don't care if you believe it or you disbelieve it. Preston Nichols is a liar? No. I'm not a liar because I believe what I'm saying. Preston Nichols is reporting the truth? I believe it's the truth. All the government will admit is that the FPS-35 radar was being used for the FAA to guide airplanes in. The information I'm putting out, the yardstick was how many people that were involved reported the same thing. I did not put out anything that wasn't reported by more than 3 people. It's up to you. Whether you're going to believe it or you don't believe it, it doesn't make any difference to me.
Will there ever be any hard evidence?
I doubt it.
Yeah, of course, because something like this, they would do everything in their power to cover it up.
Yep.
So, what would you tell the people who do believe? What should they do?
Take the information and grow with it. Knowledge is growth. Knowledge is power. Take it and use it. And use it for good. Well, although it was hellhole, it was probably one of the most dire projects ever done on this planet. I wouldn't, if you asked me, did I want to do it again? If I had to do it all over, I'd say yes. I learned a lot. It was pure avant-garde research, and I learned a lot. And it's my duty to basically take this information and apply it for the, apply it for good. If you want to call it that, good, whatever you want to call that. Which is for something constructive, not destructive. They're doing this for destructive to destroy the will of mankind. I would take the same information and make it constructive.
The warfare that is going on this planet is unbelievable. You've got psychic warfare, you've got religious warfare, you have a lot of civilian people now that are under almost continuous attack. As they speak of in the Bible, the days where the souls of men will be sorely tried, very much so. Some will be able to hang on, and keep themselves in the right direction and keep on with the light, others will not be able to. There will be a lot of, I would suspect, I'm not trying to make this as a prediction, but I would suspect when we get to those days will be a large number of suicides. Enough people will get their heads screwed on straight and realize what is going on and that they have control of the situation. If they wish to exert control, they will have the control. Civilization will not crumble and collapse. That's been predicted. It will survive, though it will change. It will have to. But people can change history. History is not cast in stone.
What I would say to everybody, whether they believe me or not, don't take my word for any of it. Do your own research and find out on your own. I can tell you what I know, but unless you understand it and experience it and research it, you will not be able to assimilate it.
Along with his wife Janet, Stewart formed a self-help educational program called Expansions. The philosophy behind Expansions proposes that an insidious alien lineage, disguised as human beings, which they refer to as the Illuminati, has covertly enslaved the human race since its inception. The Swerdlows further claim that the Illuminati control our thoughts, partially by poisoning our food and water supply.
Nazi scientists knew that there were certain things, chemicals, that they could put in food and water and medication to dumb down the brain, damage the body, make the person weaker so that they could be more controllable. Things like fluoride, chlorine in the water, mercury and aluminum in your food. All these things, when you ingest them, basically create heavy metal toxins in your body. And after a while, you become like a walking antenna. You become almost metallic. You pick up the ELF and microwave signals and scalar waves that are transmitted from satellites and cell phone towers, etc., so that you're constantly available for programming 24/7.
The Swerdlows offer a solution for the Illuminati mind control in the form of metaphysical exercises and esoteric symbology that they claim will help build a psychic and physical resistance against the invaders.
So today we have Alandra Markman. He is a spiritual ascension guide and artist living in New Orleans, Louisiana. He is a survivor of the most advanced torture in our galaxy, including the Montauk Project, which violently split his perception into dozens of simultaneous timeline experiences. For 33 years, although he said he was at Montauk for less than that, but during this period, it was what he was programmed, trained with. He was enslaved, and of course he can elaborate on it in just a bit, but he was enslaved by the satanic shadow government of Earth by many negative ET beings. His entire identity was wiped out multiple times through timeline manipulation, genetic tampering, holographic inserts, and sadistic behavioral conditioning. He has thankfully retained a reasonable amount of sanity, partly because of assistance from positive ET groups. Yeah. Okay. So tell us about when did you become aware that you were part of the Montauk Project?
Well, I only became consciously aware of it about 3 years ago, 2017. I've been free since 2003, and I've been on a healing path basically since then, particularly since 2007. I've been studying meditation and healing for that time, 13, 14 years. But Montauk specifically came back into my consciousness around 2017 when I started leading my own meditation groups and channeling benevolent ET beings more often. And it was around that time when I established contact with the benevolent ET beings. They started helping me get my memories back around Montauk and the secret space program. So yeah, so it's been about 3 years.
What's their opinion about just child trafficking in general, how humans, I guess it was actually more, we can probably blame the Thubans than humans.
Yeah, there are a lot of dimensions to this. But I mean, the basic message is often the way that a planet ascends is by exploring duality in pretty extreme ways. So obviously we've been exploring evil in some really extreme ways. And maybe it's counterintuitive, but that's part of the pathway to how we arrive at goodness, and it's how we arrive at a positive future, is by exploring these extremes of duality. So that doesn't mean that any of this like horrible behavior is being condoned. It just means that every planet in its evolution has phases of darkness and light, and we're coming out of a very long phase of darkness and moving into a phase of light. And these are natural processes. So yeah, I don't know, from a higher perspective, it's all necessary.
All right, great, thank you. So when you started getting your recall about Montauk, tell us a little bit about maybe what was it like there? Because I know, first of all, I mean, if you were there for years, how about you just start from the beginning? Like, if you have like a timeline, like initiation and all the way to the when you were.
Well, well, I should say that I can tell many different stories that are actually contradictory and simultaneously true because they're happening on different timelines. So I just want to say that right off the bat. I know that can be confusing and challenging for a lot of people, but I think it's really important for me to be honest about that, and for people to accept that, completely different facts can be equally true because they're happening in parallel realities. And, we're seeing a lot of that just in society at large with people coming into these different silos of belief. But to get back to your question, I was first born in 1970 in Patchogue, Long Island, and I was recruited into Montauk pretty early on as a very small child. I think it was sold to my mother as some sort of educational program, but I hardly ever saw her after that. I mean, I lived at the Montauk base. So Patchogue, where I was born, is it's like kind of in the middle of Long Island towards east. Montauk is at the eastern end. It's a very long island. It takes hours to drive down, east of New York City. So yeah, I was taken from Patchogue, moved to Montauk, and I lived in the barracks at Montauk for years. That was in the 70s. And that's kind of how this all started, or this version of it.
I'm just going to show this. There are some audience members who have no idea about any of this stuff. So
yeah,
if you do want to know, Montauk obviously is out here, the tip of Long Island, and the actual facility is located all underneath here, under the ocean, So can you give us an idea how big is this the facility underground here?
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming that, because yes, it goes very far underground. Well, I mean, from the tunnels at Montauk, you can actually access most of the earth because they have these underground railroad. I mean, I don't mean to invoke the historical, slavery railroad, but it's kind of ironic that because there's a real underground train system that connects most of the earth, connects the different military bases. But the Montauk base itself, I mean, it basically, I haven't seen the whole thing, to be honest. Like, I've only seen parts of it. But yeah, it does extend throughout the tri-state area that you just mentioned, like into Connecticut, into New York City. Yeah.
So how many, so I'm just showing, this is about 6 miles right here. So how many people do you think were down there altogether? Like maybe at the height of the program? Personnel, children.
Well, I mean, it's a little hard to say because I was a child at the time, and your perspective is kind of off when you're so small. But I mean, in terms of other kids that were in the barracks and in the cages with me, they kept us in cages. At any given time, like I was only aware of maybe 80 or 100 that I could relate, interact with. But I think, total throughout the complex, like at least 5,000 probably. Yeah. And that's just at one time. So, over years, many people, probably hundreds of thousands of people have gone through. Yeah.
All right. And I think it's also important to distinguish this to audience members that when they took you in 1970, they took you to, I'm assuming at least what I was told anyway, is they take you to a time bubble or a reality outside of time. And although it does exist in parallel to this reality, a lot of this training experiences took place outside of this, what we know as what we believe to be our reality. So could you confirm or elaborate on any of that?
That's definitely true. Some of the first things that happened to me there definitely took me outside of this reality. They start by, it's really horrible to think about, but they usually start just by torturing you. And that includes beatings, electrocution, it includes rape, it includes drugs. They do a lot of stuff to just push you out of your body, so that you start to live outside of your body in a dissociated, traumatized state. And that's just like basically step one. They push you into a dissociative state through trauma. And when you're outside of your body, it becomes very obvious that time is not linear, that you can really travel anywhere with your consciousness. And that's before they put you through any equipment or anything. But then they put you through, they have actual hardware set up that can turn your thought projections into reality, and that can amplify your natural ability to travel astrally. So I was blasted into all kinds of dimensions, lots of different timelines. And I do resonate with what you're saying about a bubble, because often there's the sensation of entering an atrium or a central area, like a spoke from which timelines emerge, as like on a wheel. So yeah, I resonate with that.
And I'm also believe they did that because otherwise the Andromeda is a bunch of pacifists, but they certainly are looking out for a lot of the child trafficking on this planet, and certainly human slavery, and they got our backs. So if they did it in this dimension, those bases would have been taken over. So yeah, so part of it was for that reason. Now, why don't we start from your early experiences at Montauk, because from different other whistleblowers, typically the progression is when it was first started, they used a lot of trauma and torture, and they screwed up a lot of minds. Mm-hmm. And then later on, they realized that maybe they shouldn't torture so bad, and they could still get good results. So
yeah,
if you were there early on, then you probably are aware of some of the horrific things. So why don't you tell, without triggering you, or I don't want you, have an emotional breakdown here, but could you tell us some of the stuff that happened early on in the program?
Yeah, well, I got there on the earlier end of things. So to my knowledge, it started in 1963. I'm there in the early 70s. So still on the earlier side. It went through the late 80s. And then different versions of it are continuing in different places, because it's a very multi-dimensional thing. But the part of it that was physically at Montauk, Long Island, is basically 63 to mid 80s, 85 or so, I think. But I wasn't there towards the end, so I'm not totally sure. Yeah, I was saying what they do, they assault you to push you into a traumatized state. They keep you in solitary confinement. They starve you, or this is what they were doing at the time. And a lot of us died. I'm very lucky to be alive. I consider myself quite lucky, because probably at least one I mean, just by my sort of casual estimate at the moment, like probably 1 out of 4 of us died just in the first phase, in the intake phase. So it was really screwed up. And then when they connected you to the machinery, they would run really intense amounts of electricity through you, not just electricity, but actually pranic force, like life force. And this is a little hard to describe because we don't have mainstream scientific terms for it, but they actually had devices that amplify your natural Kundalini energy and run it through your body so that you kind of, you like fry from your natural like forces of libido, your life force. So that was a big method of torture and something that definitely should be mentioned. And then there's just simply the trauma of being dissociated from your natural timeline. I mean, that's really horrendous, because just as, you know, as biological organisms in the third dimension in linear time, we're meant to be at a certain place in time and space. Like, it's important to our overall balance and our mental health. And when you start getting thrown onto different timelines, it really messes up your sense of balance, not just physical balance, but endocrine balance, the whole mental balance, physical balance as well. And it can create extreme states of nausea. I mean, those of us who are more lucky, we just had, you know, recurring like major headaches or something like that. But, you know, those of us who are less lucky, basically a lot of us died from either having our time reference so dislocated that we became completely insane and were killed, or having our Kundalini energy artificially raised, so that, like, we basically triggering a premature Kundalini awakening, which in many cases gave us strokes or similar things. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's go back a little bit here. First of all, you mentioned that 1 out of 4 children died. Now, I'm assuming if Montauk was connected with the SSP programs, they probably had regeneration bed technology. So I'm also thinking that they were certainly, if you died, it didn't necessarily mean the end of your experience of Montauk. They could possibly bring you back and keep using you over and over and over, keep killing you. And
that's true.
Do you recall them any situations where you actually died and they had to bring you back?
Well, this gets a little bit confusing to try to tell in a linear way, because when I first went there, they didn't have regen tanks, but in some of the future scenarios that I visited, they did. And so there were times when I would actually die, or one of us would die in the future, be regenerated and sent back to our original place. And the original place didn't necessarily have regen tanks or any way to regenerate people. But we'd be sent back from the future to experience the whole thing over again after having been regenerated in the future. So I know that's kind of wacky, but that's what happened to me and a lot of other people.
All right, so certainly, I know Stuart Swirlow. I think he said 100,000 children were died at Montauk. Is that a number you could confirm, or maybe?
I mean, I'm not privy to the mass statistics. I can only talk about my own experience, but
okay.
I would say that's probably a conservative estimate. I mean, I remember Preston Nichols saying it was probably closer to 300,000. And that feels a little more right to me.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And, you know, I think like in Washington, D.C., we have all these monuments to slavery, monuments to World War II, and all these people that died, but there's nothing to recognize all the children that died at Montauk. So I think in the future, that's another thing that we as a society need to reconcile with, that this not only did take place, but the survivors certainly need to be recognized. Unfortunately, a lot of that's not going to happen until after disclosure, but you know what? We're doing our own disclosure. We don't need official. So
yeah, here we are.
I guess I don't know how many people.
Not just Montauk, but I would include all the survivors of satanic ritual abuse and the other, the other aspects of the secret space program. We're talking about millions of people, really. So, yeah.
Right. Okay, well, I wanted to go a little bit more into how they treated you at Montauk, because early on, some of the survivors, they a typical theme would be they remember being in a cage, and they might stick rats in there, snakes, spiders.
Yeah.
They usually would not feed you, or if they did feed you, they'll give you a bowl of dog food. And even Preston, he used to make jokes about us because he had a dog named, was it Stupid? I don't know. And he used to say, "Do you want to be like this dog? You want to be like Stupid?" Do you remember the name of his dog? Do you remember that?
I don't remember, but that's actually ringing a bell. I think that might be right. He definitely had a couple dogs actually, but that and they would often bring them out. I mean, I can definitely verify that, having eaten a lot of animal food. That part started, I got a flash of that when I was a teenager, and I found after I was free, I found myself eating animal food, like dog and cat food. I just felt compelled to, and I didn't really know why. And I'm just now kind of connecting those dots, but yeah, I mean, we were definitely dehumanized, and in that way.
And some of it even gets worse than this, but I don't know if they didn't do that. I don't think they did that to us at Montauk, but some of the bases on the moon where they kidnapped people and torture them. What some of the things they don't do is they don't feed the people, and they let them die, and then they put them back in the regen tank, and then they just put them back in the cell, and another month later they die, and they keep doing this over and over again. So at least we got some food. Do you remember the lunch bag? They would put a sandwich, a fruit, maybe some milk in there, and then put a pill. Do you remember the pill in the lunch bag?
Yeah, I do.
It was a little brown paper lunch bag.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember what that pill, what that pill was about?
If I remember correctly, and you're just kind of jogging my memory here, actually, but because I don't necessarily have perfect recall about everything. There's a lot of blank space. It was extremely traumatic. So just to say that, but if I remember correctly, it was probably it would put you in a trance state. It was like a tranquilizer, but it would also heighten your, your psychic senses a little bit, if I remember it correctly.
And the only thing I could add to that, I don't personally remember this. This is what another individual told me, but the drug was meant to wipe your memories of later on down the road. They don't want us to recover our memories at Montauk. And also Tony Rodriguez reported where they were also giving him regular doses of this. I don't know if it was this exact drug, but that's one of the things they wanted the participants to be not remember all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, we were on all kinds of different drugs. I mean, and I'd be hard pressed to name them all, but generally, meant to incapacitate us in some way.
Okay, so going back to the cages, do you remember this hallway? The walls were painted green. It was kept low light. There was water on the floor, and it was always cold in this room. And there was cages of kids, and they kept us. Usually, I believe we were naked, maybe at one point, and they would throw buckets of water on us. And even though we were already cold, they would throw more water. Do you remember anything like that?
I definitely went through stuff like that. Yeah. I don't remember the Green Hall specifically. I really appreciate you talking about your memories too. It's definitely helpful. And maybe we can at some point have a round table of just different Montauk survivors, and we can all kind of, just go into it. I definitely went through the water, torture, being stripped naked, being soaked. I think the space you're talking about would have been upstairs from the holding cages. And probably, I didn't go up there very much. I think they started using that space more like in the late 70s or early 80s, which is when I think you were there. So you probably had more experiences upstairs than I did.
And do you think they also did waterboarding as well? Is that part of the programming, the dissociation process?
Yeah, and similar things. Yeah, a lot of different types of torture. I guess I'm not sure if I personally went through that, but I went through similar things. Yeah.
Okay. What about the meat hooks?
Ugh.
Did that actually take place? Did they take these children and put them on meat hooks?
Yes, it did actually take place. And I have to say, this is not unique to Montauk. This is actually an ancient satanic ritual abuse thing. I mean, butcher's tools have been used like for at least hundreds of years. I mean, probably thousands, honestly, by the satanic cults to torture people. So this is nothing. So, and I want to be clear that like what was happening at Montauk was all based on like very ancient satanic ritual mind control. So, you know, there's obviously this like sci-fi aspect where everything's futuristic and all that, but there's also these are very ancient practices that have been used for a very long time, including at Montauk itself. Before the time travel project even started, it was a ritual abuse site, and there was a tremendous amount of satanic activity going on there. So I just want to say that because a lot of people who are not necessarily space program survivors, but are ritual abuse survivors, have memories of like being strung up like cuts of meat. And basically, you know, lacerated, some people allowed to bleed to death for the others to witness, and also just used for various forms of hanging and spinning torture. Yeah. So that's like more the Montauk version, but the traditional version is really, it's literally just, it's pretty bare bones. You know, it's just like hooks and wires and ropes, nothing super technological, but then Montauk took that a step further.
What do they gain? What do they gain by doing these rituals on us?
That's a good question. And there's really no rational answer for it, because like these things very rightly are not at all conceivable for a rational person. So talking about a reason is kind of, you know, nonsensical, because there's really no rational reason. But I think the feeling is that the perpetrators are able to drain our life force in some way, particularly with children and adolescents, sometimes young adults. They feel that they can somehow extract our life force and add it to their own life force. So that's a big theme. That's also pretty universal to ritual abuse survivors. And then, I mean, the Draco themselves, who are some of the main handlers, so as Air Force people and Greys of various kinds, and also reptilians, mostly Draco and Saurian. The Draco basically have as their goal to enslave our entire galaxy. And so many different strains of Draco with different qualities that, you know, a lot of these things can all exist. Yeah, I mean, they consider it, you can consider it part of their religion to pursue genetic experimentation on all of life, including themselves. That's just like what they do. Yeah.
So the beings that were primarily in charge of Montauk were the Thuban, were really a sub-race of the Thuban Draco. And the Thubans, I guess what they were, this being that was in charge of Montauk, his soul energy, whatever, if you would even consider it a soul, came from maybe one of the lower levels of hell. And what they were trying to do is to create an army of sleepers that would be loyal to them in the time of the, I guess, the Black Awakening, because they wanted to, I guess, to come out and do this New World Order scenario where everybody, where they would all, oh gosh, I'm getting a horrible headache. Why don't you talk a little bit?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, sometimes that happens to me when I'm getting into something and I still have programming against getting into it, you know? So I wouldn't be surprised, but yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you talking about the Thubins. They're an offshoot that are they're mostly pretty local, like in our solar system, local galaxy. If my understanding is correct, they're most of the Draco that are elsewhere in the galaxy are a different strain. But yeah, they were really vicious controllers. I'm trying to wait. What were you just starting to talk about?
Well, I was going to go more into what some of the Draco were doing. And this isn't something that I personally remember, but I was told that was done to us. And this is something that's very controversial, and this goes into the ORGY. So they would take children that were involved, and then what these Draco would do is they would shapeshift into children, and then they would participate with us.
Yeah.
And they were doing this, I guess, because you mentioned harness get our Kundalini to activate.
Yeah.
And I guess they also wanted to harness our chi energy, because we star seeds that were involved, the ones that survived anyway, that could survive, we're all highly evolved beings from our past lives elsewhere in the galaxy.
Yeah.
So we were basically like batteries that they want taking our energy, like psychic vampires now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so so there was a room where they would do that, and there was also a lot of the NAZI. Do you remember any kind of like the swastikas? YouTube,
yeah, I don't know if we can say that on YouTube, but yes, I do remember that. Honestly, yeah, I've had a lot of experience with people from the German diaspora of various descriptions. They're very, very intimately involved with Montauk. I wanted to mention, in case anybody wants to explore the ritual abuse and the NAZI aspect more, Wendy Hoffman's memoir, The Enslaved Queen, it starts off at Montauk. It's about what was happening at Montauk in the 40s and 50s, like before the time travel. And basically she had to deal with German expatriates who were abusing her at Montauk. So definitely recommend that if people want to explore that. In my own experience, yeah, there were definitely some second generation, like German
paperclips.
Yeah, paperclip officers that had been absorbed into the Air Force. Yeah.
How about Mengele? Do you remember Mengele?
He keeps coming up. I'm not sure if, well, actually, yeah. I mean, this is going to sound kooky, but it's all kooky anyway. I think I've had experiences with him, but I don't think it was actually him. I think it was actually a cyborg that was created in his image. Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, this may sound weird. Was there ever a room, like a gymnasium type room, where they would throw parties and events for the elite officers?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they had a bunch of, I mean, in some respects, it was like a normal military base. They had a whole bunch of, you know, different entertainment options and whatnot. But,
okay.
But yeah, yes.
Well,
short answer.
I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming you probably weren't in the room when this happened, but in this particular room, they threw a party and they were serving bottles. I mean, they had glasses of wine, but there was blood in it, and they were all wearing the NAZI officer. Yeah, and some of definitely the high level officer. Yeah, a paperclip. Some of the officers, they say that died or were there, and they were drinking this blood, and they were there was a projection, a video playing of how they were in charge and control of everything, and they were all laughing and they're just having a wonderful time. and how stupid the humans, I guess the people in America were.
Yeah.
Does that sound something that would have taken place there?
Yes. I mean, that definitely sounds, unfortunately, very plausible to me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, okay. Well, let's move on.
Because you brought it up.
Well, I don't remember the upper management of Montauk. Maybe I interacted with them. They when they discharged me from Montauk, or really when they rescued us, they put me through the trip seat like multiple times, where they gave everybody else at least one treatment. They gave me at least two treatments to make sure I would never remember anything. But I don't want. We can go on that at the end of the interview, because I wanted to. I actually like to know a little bit more what you remember. I think you said you were in the cages. Can you tell us like what animals or critters they put in there with you?
Oh God. I mean, just about everything. There was one point, I appreciate that you mentioned insects and vermin. And again, this is not, I have to say, this is not unique to Montauk. This is like a satanic ritual thing that's been going on forever and ever. Like, you know, for as long as we've had, like, you know, gruesome insects and snakes and stuff, they've been used in this way against people, against children especially. So, you know, it's all part of the exaggerated duality of Western culture, which is now being resolved finally. But, you know, all the things that we consider vermins and pests, that I'm sorry, I always go very meta. I'd start talking about collective things, but because that's just where my head is at. But in terms of like, yeah, there were snakes, there were rats. I don't know if this is true, but I seem to remember actually alligators being in there. There were times where we were forced into bestiality, and we'd have to be sexual with animals in various ways. And again, that's the satanic thing, which is really horrible. But
so it seems to me what they were trying to do is they were trying to program us to think that we were these vermin, that we were just like them. So we're hanging out in the cages and there's snakes and this and that.
Yeah. I want to say in particular, I had a lot of insect programming. I was really taught to think about myself as an insect on a very, very deep level, to identify with insects, to think of myself as one of them, and to value my life like an insect's life is valued or not valued. And this is also, you know, it ties into classic satanic stuff. You know, the whole Monarch program is named for the monarch butterfly. And there's a lot of imagery that has been used on survivors, where you're taught to think of yourself as an insect. It gets very intense. I mean, because they have people, they manipulate your reality. I mean, obviously it's easy to confuse a small child, but beyond that, they actually have holographic inserts where you're put into a scenario where you experience yourself to be an insect. And so it gets very literal and physical, and you actually experience it through your senses. Yeah. And then there's, you know, just the more obvious, like people like dressing up and creating certain like theatrical scenarios for a child to experience. But yeah.
Alandra, do you remember them re-aging you? Because I was there from the ages of 7 to 9, and I was there for 43 years, and they kept me between 7 and 9 for that whole time. So I was curious, do you recall the re-aging?
I do.
What can you tell us about it?
Well, I have parallel sets of memories for certain times in my life. Like at a certain age, I can remember being in distinctly different places with distinctly different things happening. And part of that is because I was put onto different timelines, and I was re-aged on some of those timelines. So yeah, I mean, I have repeating stretches of memory where it's like, and that's a pretty key time that you're talking about, like the prepubescent, the, you know, older child before you become an adolescent, is considered especially potent for harvesting life force. So they want to keep you at that age pretty often. For myself, I probably went through the period of 6 to 12 multiple times. And again, I can narrate different versions of it that are all equally true because they're on different, they're parallel iterations of the same experience. It's taken me a long time to start figuring this out, in part because this is not my original body. And that also gets really confusing for me as much as for any audience member. But as I understand it, on the main timeline that I was on at Montauk, I actually died and I was not regenerated. I had my consciousness moved into this body, the person who's now speaking. And then this body was actually altered a bunch of times. So we're not just talking about age regression, we're also talking about physical reconstructive surgery, or not even, more advanced things than surgery. So my physical appearance has been changed a few times. And that was part of the process of wiping out my identity. So I've actually, I know this is crazy, but I've had different faces. I've had slightly different bodies. And also this is not my original body. So, but I have more or less continuous consciousness throughout all these experiences. So I feel like the same person. Yeah, but that's that can of worms.
Okay, one Montauk survivor told me this story where he was able to physically shapeshift into a female girl, and he tried to escape the base, and that didn't turn out so well for him. So did they also have that ability as well to change their sex or gender?
Yeah, definitely. The level of technology that they have, you can do just about anything in that way. The gender reassignment surgery that is available in the mainstream is extremely primitive, compared to what the Satanists have available. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess they wanted us to, one of the things they wanted us to do was to be able to service people, I guess, as a pedophiles. They would hand us over on missions, so we would get information, and then the pedophile thought that they were just having a good time, but we were the one gathering intel. Of course, we were being traumatized all along. But do you remember any missions like that where they send you to live with a pedophile?
Definitely, yes. I was definitely feminized in a lot of ways. To my memory, I don't think I was physically made into a woman, but I was definitely feminized and put into a girl role and put in girls' clothing, wearing wigs, growing my hair out, made into a very stereotypically female sex object. Definitely, that happened to me on quite a few timelines. And what my mission actually was with the people that were buying my enslavement as a sex object, or otherwise were forced into engaging into raping me or whatever they were doing. The missions were very different. Sometimes it was gathering information. Sometimes they just, it was just setting up the person, to let their guard down so that they could be killed or drugged. That was very common. I can't tell you like how many men I've seen just like dragged out of a room that I was being raped in, because they basically just wanted them distracted so that they could ambush them. So that happened quite a lot. Yeah, the specific missions are so numerous that I don't know if I can even that's what I want to say, just that there were a lot of different ones.
All right. Well, let's go into some of these missions, but before we do, how about we start with the consciousness chair? Certainly Andy Perot talked about this chair they got from a UFO, and it amplifies his consciousness, and you can create matter out of thin air, or you can open up portals. So
that's true.
All right. Yeah. So tell us what it looks like, or whatever you know about it.
Well, the appearance changed over the years. In the 60s, well, I should start when I got there, but I understand that in the 60s, it was much more clunky looking. There were a lot of mainframe computers. they downsized the equipment over the years so that the appearance changed a little bit, but generally it's this chair that it's a little bit like a dentist chair. Yeah, that'll work. But it's hooked up to all kinds of equipment, just walls of equipment. And there's a piece that goes on your head. It's like this dome, semicircle thing that just sits on top of your head, a bunch of wires attached to the dome. I think they actually show a fictional version of this in Stranger Things, if anybody wants some soft disclosure. Yeah, there's a piece that goes in your head. You sort of lay back in this chair. There are a bunch of monitors around. When you're in the chair, they ask you to focus on a specific point, which leads into the time tunnels. And that point, usually I experienced it being sort of in the left of my field of vision and towards the front of me. It was kind of a specific spot. And the sensation that I would have, and I'm not sure if this was physical or if it was just in my astral body, but the sensation that I would have is of being sucked forward into the time tunnel from the chair. So it's kind of lying in this chair, and my perception is that there's this enormous swirling vortex, usually grayish white, of light in front of me. And again, I'm not sure if that's just in my perception or if it was external or both. Because the lines get very tricky with this sort of stuff. Yeah, I thought that was a pretty accurate depiction of the shape of the chair that you showed earlier. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just certainly. I don't think it really had that little footrest. This attachment. Like I think this was actually connected. I don't think that was separate, but.
Yeah, there were pieces that could be separated from it. Yeah, and I also know, I can just also verify that the negative Zeta Reticulans and the negative Orion groups were the main ones. You know, it was their technology basically, and it was given, if I understand right, it was given in exchange for slaves and other concessions from the government people. So. I also want to say, because I was just talking about this with another survivor recently, and I haven't heard this talked about. So there's the chair, which was the original sort of installation for the psychic to, or the survivor, the victim, to do their work. The chair was there from the 60s going to the 70s. By the mid 70s, they also had another device that was this bullet-shaped chamber. The survivor I was talking to was comparing it to an MRI machine because it was kind of like that. But yeah, it's this cylindrical chamber that's tapered on both ends. And you'd go inside this chamber and going into the late 70s, early 80s, the bullet chamber was used quite often, sometimes more than the chair, because it basically gave you a completely, I guess what we'd call a virtual reality experience. Whereas in the chair, you would still have awareness of your environment to some extent. And they considered that, for some people that interfered with their ability to go through the time tunnels because they would get distracted by the external environment. But in the bullet chamber, your sensory stimulation is basically cut off. It's a little bit like a sensory deprivation tank. It would make it easier for more people, more children mainly, to be able to focus and go through the time tunnels.
All right, thank you. All right, so the time tunnel opens up and you're in hyperspace. Tell us what it looks like when you go into hyperspace, or if it looks like anything.
Yeah. I have to say it's going to look like different things to different people, because this really touches on your inner world, like your psychic world. So it's going to manifest differently for each survivor. So I just want to say that to any survivors also that are listening. Even if you remember something in a different way than somebody's describing it, it's equally real, it's equally valid, because a lot of this stuff is really through the inner the inner eye, you know. So anyway, for me, I would usually see it as I mentioned, this like grayish white swirling vortex. I would enter forward through it, like through in my astral body, or sometimes in my physical body, to the best that I could tell. I'd go through basically, so when you move between dimensions, often there's a sense of the space being flattened out, like things looking two-dimensional, like everything looks like it's on paper. That's really common. That was common for me. And then also the dimensions, and this is more about dimensions than time, but they do relate. The dimensions are at right angles to one another. So when you're shifting between dimensions, it's a perceptual shift where it's like your former reality almost becomes a piece of paper, and you shift your plane so that you're on a different plane relative to your original reality. And the reality that you're moving into seems 3D to you, and the reality that you came from looks like 2D. So that's